3 minutes. Good evening and welcome to the ARK-aeology Files. This is episode 11 and we are going to be continuing our discussion on the Exodus and Mount Sinai. We started last week. We were on a roll. We didn't have time to finish everything, so we'll pick it up right after we have a word of prayer and a brief overview of where we left off. So if you could bow your heads with me for a moment. Dear Lord, thank you for being with us this week. Thank you for guiding us safely through it. Please be with us as we end this week and we start another week. Guide us in all that we do and guide us as we open your word and we study all of the evidence for the stories that we read about in the Bible. In your name we pray, amen. So last week we learned that Mount Sinai is actually not where most people believe it is. Mount Sinai is actually in Saudi Arabia. And when we are looking at things like Galatians 4:25, it actually comes out and tells us that Sinai is in Arabia. So when most people are thinking of Mount Sinai, they're thinking of the mountain that has the St. Catherine's Monastery at the base of it in the Sinai Peninsula. But in actuality, it is not here in the Sinai Peninsula. Sinai Peninsula has been considered part of Egypt for eons. It's actually at a location in Arabia, or Saudi Arabia as we now call it, that is located in the land of Midian, where this blue star is. We determined that there is a series of checklists or check marks that will provide conclusive evidence from the Bible on the location of Mount Sinai. So we determined that yes, it has to be on the other side of the Red Sea crossing in the land of Midian. There needs to be a cave. This is the cave that Elijah stayed at, and this mountain does meet the requirements. There also needs to be a split rock nearby, and this mountain does have a ginormous 60-foot tall split rock to the west of it. There also needs to be evidence of fire because, as we read in Exodus, the Lord came down and it appeared as if the entire mountain was on fire. And this mountain does meet those qualifications. And by this mountain, I mean Jebel Makla. This is called, or the name of this means the burnt mountain. Nearby, we find Jebel El-Lawz, which means mountain of the almonds. This is significant because Aaron's rod that budded was an almond rod. So we do have evidence of there being almonds in this general vicinity. If you look at this image, we can see where there's a distinct boundary between the burnt rocks on the peak of the mountain compared to the rocks of the lower portions. So that is where we left off last week. And this week we're going to pick it up with the altar. So Moses writes in Exodus 24:4 that he went up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill, and that there were 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes there. And when we are looking at the base of the mountain, we're now going from around the split rock, around the northern end of this mountain range, coming in from the east. And as we come in from the east, there is a valley there. And in that valley is an area that we're going to refer to as the holy area. It is at the base. So if we are looking at the picture that is on the right side of your screen that is labeled to site location, there is a formation here, and at this formation, it's actually at the base of a trail that leads up to the mountain that we now can pretty much guarantee is the Mount Sinai that is talked about in the Bible. If we look over here on the left side of the screen, this is an aerial view of what is proposed to be the altar of Moses. Now, as we learned last week, there were possibly upwards of 3.5 million people that were coming out of Egypt. That would have been a lot of sacrifices. So there are certain things that are needed for sacrifices. One of those would be an altar, and another thing would be water. There is no longer water running through this river here, but we can tell that there was at one time a river that flowed down. So the river would have flowed from up here in the mountain down this valley or gorge, past the altar site and down into the rest of the valley. And if we are looking at image number 4, we can see where Moses' altar would have been here, and the river would have continued to flow down towards the encampment down in this general direction. The altar itself would have been located here on the upper left image, right where the cursor is at the moment. And we have this very odd L-shaped formation. And when you are looking at this formation, the sacrifices would have been brought down the formation here, around, and then led back up where they would have stood in a waiting line and been led to the altar through here. And the individual that was bringing the offering for sacrifice would have exited right in this area here and walked back down to the camp. Here is a ground level view. This is going to be on your lower left side of your screen, just to show you how much of the formation is still left. We do not know how tall the walls were. It suggested that the walls would have been much taller because they would not have wanted the animals to have been able to see what was going on to keep them calm. So this is an example of just how tall these walls would have been. The remnants of the walls come up to about somewhere between waist and chest high on this individual who is walking through the site. And if you would like to see this on a satellite view, this is a satellite view of this location. So the mountain would be on the upper portion of the screen. Could not fit it in here. This is actually a new road that is coming through. The previous road was a dirt road. This is now a paved road due to some construction projects that are going on in the Arabian desert. They're putting in a new city, and so this road now cuts straight through the encampment site. But we can see where Moses' altar and the proposed golden calf site are actually about a mile away from each other and within clear view of one another. We'll actually be talking about this location in just a little bit, but I wanted to zoom in to this site right here. If you can see a faint outline right here, and we're going to zoom in, and you're going to see this outline. It almost looks like a trench, but this is actually a fence that has been installed. It's been installed for well over 30 years at this point. This was a fence. It has signs on it that say archaeological site. People are not allowed in. We have a guardhouse. There are new buildings that have been installed rather recently. These did not used to be here. But if you look closely, you can see where this used to be an ancient lake and river. And I'm actually going to show you where the water used to flow and reside. You can see where there used to be a lake bed here. This was the shore. And this is the proposed outline of where all of the water from these two different water sources, one that was coming from off of the mountain and one that was coming from the western side of the mountain over on this fork. So we have two different forks coming together to form this lake, which then emptied into potentially another larger lake or a river, fast-moving stream. We're not exactly certain. We do have evidence that would suggest that in addition to this lake and river, that there were actually seep wells that were about 20 feet deep in some places. There was a bracelet that was found at the bottom of one of these wells that was then confiscated, but we can see the remnants of what these wells would have looked like and where they would have stood. We do know that the one was excavated and does go down about 20 feet. We can see some small remnants here. And what these wells would have done is if you had a lot of animals and people that were coming into the water, it may have been very muddy and you wouldn't have wanted to drink that water. So seep wells were wells that were built with filtration systems in them. So there would have been layers of gravel, sand, larger rocks, and as the water seeped into these wells, it would have filtered out all of these particles so that you could have clean drinking water. And we are talking, again, somewhere around 2 to 3.5 million people. So this lake that we are seeing, roughly 900 feet from shore to shore here and approximately 500 feet wide here, would have been the main water source for these individuals. And this is probably around this location is where they would have been crossing over this lake to get up to the altar site. And when we are looking at the borders and the pillars, because remember, they weren't allowed to go up the mountain, they weren't allowed to even touch the borders. So the borders could not have been down here near the water source because one, they wouldn't have been able to access the water, and two, they would have had to get to the altar site. Yes, I see a comment that says, didn't they refer to God as El, pronounced El? It makes sense that the altar shape would have been the sacrificial lamb. That's one way to look at it. If you look, there is a uh, specialist in animal husbandry. Her name is Dr. Temple, and she actually looked at this site and said that it looks similar to some of the structures that she's seen for when they're actually going through and herding cattle and getting them to do what they want and to go into the pastures and fields and different facilities that they need to get them to go to. So there's several different theories on why it is shaped this way. And when we are looking at the shape, this is a closer up view of the image that I showed earlier. It does have that L shape as you're looking at it from above. This red arrow here is actually pointing to some of the remnants of pillars. It's thought that some of these pillars fragments that we see are part of the original pillars that may have existed. It is possible that the pillars were put across the path to the mountain at this location, because we know that the individuals would have had to pass these pillars in their current location to actually get into this walkway to bring their animals for sacrifice. So these pillars were probably standing upright more along this lower edge of your screen now, and they've either rolled, been pushed down, or these are later pillars that were put in as reminders for what this site represented and who was originally here. We've seen similar things that have been set up, such as the pillars at the Red Sea crossing site. There's also pillars like Jacob's pillars, the pillars that Joshua had set up when they crossed the sea there. So pillars are something that we see oftentimes mentioned in scripture, and it would not be out of the realm of possibilities for these to have been later additions. Some people do say that these are actually from the 200s BC. There is a mine nearby that does the marble from around the 200s BC. So this is something that would have been accessible at the time. So these could be from the Sinai period, they could be from much later, but the important thing is that we do know that there are pillars that are in existence in this particular area. It would involve more research to determine exactly when these pillars were put into place, or if we could do some excavations around the base of the mountain to locate the original boundary markers for where this would have been. And then this is just images showing more locations of the different pillars. The pillars can be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 feet in width. And if you are looking from, this is the Golden Calf site, you can see where some of the fencing is. And if you're looking from there back up, you can see where this is the valley where they would have been taking their sacrifices to. And speaking of the Golden Calf site, we read about this incident in Exodus 32. Aaron, of all people, made a molten calf and built an altar before it. So when we are reading this, it's not that they were making sacrifices on the golden calf. We read that there should be two different locations. We should see a location where the golden calf stood, and we should also see a location that is the actual altar where the sacrifices were made in front of or before the altar. And if we go back to this site that we are examining, we actually find where there is a pile of rocks that has been cordoned off, marked as an archaeological site, and it would appear to be a pedestal with an altar where sacrifices were made. And it's very interesting because when we are looking at this, it matches the criteria, but there's also engravings that I will show you shortly of calves, which we know were something that was associated. But I just want to illustrate how in God's face they were with this instance. Because if we're looking back towards the Mount Sinai site right here, this is where the golden calf would have stood. So they were literally worshiping an idol right where they could see Mount Sinai, picture Mount Sinai lit up on fire. There's this cloud of God's presence that is hovering over this mountain, and they are still bold enough to stand right here in the presence of God practically and be practicing their idolatry. And because they were doing this idolatry, they actually were punished for it. So when Moses comes down, he has the commandments. Now, God had spoke the 10 commandments to the people, and the people were so afraid and so like, we can't stand in front of God. Please, Moses, you go speak to him. So God spoke to the people, gave them the 10 commandments. They got afraid. They sent Moses as their ambassador up this fiery mountain. Moses gets the 10 commandments written in stone. And as he's coming back down, they're sitting here worshiping this golden calf. And Aaron has the audacity to say, well, you know what? I threw the metal in and out walked this golden calf. But because of this instance, the people actually were punished. And so, as one of the items that we should be looking for at the Mount Sinai site, we should be looking for a graveyard, because there were a number of individuals, several thousand, that were killed because of their worship of the idol and their pagan practices. So at the site, not in the main area, but off to the side, we can actually find remnants of an ancient graveyard with thousands of burials. And this is very significant because there is no known city nearby. There's no known ancient city nearby. So to have this mass graveyard in this location is evidence that there was a large number of people that resided in this area and that were burying their dead here. So the image that we have on the right side, this is what the graveyard looked like before there were some excavations that were done, or at least some restorations. And the image on the left here is actually after some of the restoration to this area was completed. And we can see more of the images and find out more information about this restoration work from Discovered Media. These are some photos that they had posted from their visit to the site in 2025. Now, because of the golden calf incident, we do know that they were very capable of metalworking. We also know that God had some people of his own that were good with metalworking. And so these individuals, per God's direction, made something that was called the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle used a variety of materials. So some of the supplies that they were using were gold and silver and bronze, but they also had cloth and furs and jewels and spices and oils, and the list just went on and on and on. People donated time and energy. If we are talking today's value, the amount that people donated was the equivalent of somewhere around $152 million just in the gold, the silver, and the bronze alone. That does not include all of the special cloths and spices and oils that were donated for this. So, as we're looking at this location, we should be able to find someplace where this metallurgy took place, because you don't just have a campfire and a golden calf walk out. You don't just have, a fireplace and get all of the tabernacle furniture that we know existed. So we should be looking for some place where they were able to smelt all of this metal. And do we find that at this location? The answer is yes. If we are looking at an overhead satellite image view, we have Moses's proposed altar right here. We come down, we follow where the pool or the lake, their water source, we can see where that is right here, the dry lake bed. We come down, so from here to here is about a mile, and from here to here is just under a mile. And this is what is known as now the smelting site. Now, the children of Israel would have been encamped in this entire vicinity. And I'm going to zoom in just a little more and tilt the camera slightly to give an idea. It does have some hills, but it's relatively flat. It was great for their encampment with all of their individuals. And when we are looking at these different locations, we can see where Moses would have went up on the side of the mountain. We can see where it's very great for camping and communicating back and forth. There's visuals. So when you're at the smelting site, because it is slightly elevated above the other areas, you can get clear views of the entire encampment and all of the different locations and kind of keep your eye on what's going on. So there are 15, or I'm sorry, there are 5 different furnaces that they know of that they've been looking at. And the largest of these is 15 feet wide and 5 feet tall. And from this viewpoint, you might not recognize this pile of rocks here as a furnace, but when you get closer up, you can tell, oh, this is an ancient kiln. And you would have needed an ancient kiln to be able to melt the metals so that you could get them into a liquid state and pour them into sheets, and then take the sheets and use those to form all of the different fittings that were needed and beat it out to get all of the different pieces of the temple furniture. And I see a comment here. It says they could see and had heard the proof of God's existence and his requirements. That is why their lives were required of them. Yes, totally agree with that one. They had literally just had God come down and talk to them and give them the rule and the law. He laid down the law, so there was no questions about it. And it didn't even take them more than 40 days for them to be totally and completely disregarding it. So looking at this metalworks location, we're going to zoom in because there's some interesting things that have been found at this location. And those interesting things are molds. Now, we see molds like this in Armenia. If you watched the segment that we did on Noah's Ark and some of the locations after the flood, you'll have heard of the metalworking site known as Metzmore, where they were known for their metals. Around the general vicinity, we do find molds that are very similar to the molds that you are seeing here. This is not erosion. This is actually brass fittings, or fittings that they used the brass on. And you can see where there would be hooks, places where they would have made the furniture. And remember, some of this stuff had to be beaten out. So you could put your sheet metals, gold, silver, bronze, brass, you could place those sheets over your molds, and then you could pound them into these molds to get the particular shapes and details that you wanted. What is very fascinating about this site is this mold right here. I think that this is one of the most important finds from the Mount Sinai location that I have seen. And the reason that I find this location so fascinating is because of this portion of mold right here. Now, most people wouldn't think anything of it, but when we are looking at this mold right here, we can see where this mold has some impressions in it. And you can see how there's these ridges, and these ridges come across, they go over the curve and follow and continue on. This is not something that you would see naturally. This is hand formed, and these are feathers. These are the impression of feathers. Now, why would feathers be important in relation to the Mount Sinai site? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that and see if you want to pop your theories into the comment section to determine why this would be a fascinating find at the Mount Sinai site. All right. Have you thought about why you might find this interesting at the Mount Sinai site? If you think that this had something to do with the Ark of the Covenant, then you are correct, because we know that feathers are associated with something called wings. And we also know that the Ark of the Covenant had two angels that stood on either end, and those angels had wings, and those wings went over top of the Ark of the Covenant. When we are looking at this mold right here, we are potentially looking at the mold that the gold sheet was placed over and then beat into shape for the angel's wings for the Ark of the Covenant. What makes this really, really fascinating, in addition to that, is the fact that when you measure this out, this wing actually equals about 3 feet. And that would be 3 feet long. And if you include this section, this is about 10 inches, and it would appear to be where the wing attached to the back of the angel, which would make the wing itself that went over top of the ark about 2.5 feet wide. When we are looking at the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant, that is approximately the dimensions of halfway across the Ark of the Covenant, meaning that the wing of the one angel went over, met about halfway the wing of the other angel. That means that these angels were not these small little 1 foot, 2 foot angels that we usually see depicted on top of the ark. If you combine this find and the size of these wings with the statement from the Bible that the angels were to be placed on the ends, not on top of the Ark of the Covenant, but one angel standing on one end and one angel standing on the other, that would mean that these angels, if these wings are proportionate to their bodies, were approximately 5 feet in height. If you then go and you look at the angel dimensions from Solomon's temple in 1 Kings 6:23-27, we find that King Solomon built 2 additional cherub to place inside of the most holy place, in addition to the angels that were on the Ark of the Covenant itself. And these angels that Solomon placed are very, very large. The angels on the Ark of the Covenant would have been almost exactly 1/3 the size of the angels that King Solomon then placed in the Ark of the Covenant. So it would make them all proportionate with one another, which God's temple and sanctuary are all about the proportions. So that would lead me to believe that these angels were actually about 5 feet tall and held up the Ark of the Covenant, particularly the mercy seat, one on either end, not on top of the seat, but actually holding it up. And this mold shows that these angel wings were not tiny, but that they were actually huge. And when we are looking at some more of the evidence of the Israelites being in this location, that's where we can find the rune engravings. So these are scattered throughout the area. Some can be found at the Golden Calf site, some can be found on other rocks nearby. What's very interesting about these animals is these are bulls, but these bulls are done in an Egyptian style, not a style that is found typically in Saudi Arabia. In fact, this is one of the only locations from the research that I've been able to find and some of the other researchers where you can actually find this particular style of bull. And we know that when we were looking at last week, the Sarabet El Kadim location, which is just next to the traditional Sinai site, that they were mining turquoise and that there was this big debate between the bull god, who is also Hathor is associated with the bull and the calf. And we see those Hathor style horns on these bull images. This is the debate that we are still seeing at Mount Sinai between the false gods and the true God. So these engravings really do help show that there was a group of people here that did worship God, but that also had an Egyptian influence, which we know that the people of Israel had. And we know that there was a lot of them because of the graves, but also because we've been able to find the artifacts that have been left behind from when they were at this site. A lot of people say, oh, we can't find any evidence in the Sinai Peninsula of this large group of people, and therefore we don't really think that the story is true. But if you're looking in the wrong location, you're never going to find the evidence. And when you go to the actual site that is there in Saudi Arabia, the evidence of their everyday life is right there. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of vases and pestles and pottery, toys, you name it, you can find it at this location. And also, when you're looking through, you can see portions of their life. There are some areas that look like they may be the remnants of where tents had been anchored, because you would have to anchor your tent. They didn't have pop up tents, the tents had to be anchored. So, when we are looking at all of this evidence, we can see that on our checklist, we have a Red Sea crossing, we have the site in the land of Midian, we have the cave, we have the split rock, we have evidence of a mountain that was on fire. We have evidence of there being an altar to God, and not just a altar that was small, but an altar that would be serviceable for a very large number of sacrifices, indicative of a large number of individuals that were offering them. We do see where there is evidence of a border and pillars that can be debatable because of the timing, but further research can prove that, hey, we do know that while this was a site that was active for mining in the 200s BC, we can also find that there was activity there long before this. We do find evidence of an altar, or what would appear to be a pedestal, where the golden calf probably resided with an altar in front of it. There is evidence of a large number of graves in the vicinity, in addition to a very large population. And the evidence of a large population brings us to a question about a slide from last week. And the question is, what was the number chart and why were there two different columns of numbers? So let's clarify this chart that was shown last week. This is the chart that was being discussed, talking about the number of individuals that left Egypt. So we were talking about numbers 1 and 2, where we have the males that are 20 and upward that are of war age. We determined that war age meant 20 to 59. We can read where those that were aged 60 plus had to give a smaller portion because they were considered elders and not able to bring as much. So their requirements were decreased. So while it says 20 to 60, 60 was kind of the limit there. So males that were aged 20 to 60, we're going to say 20 to 59, totaled this amount. And then we have the end of numbers where we have the total of all of the males that were 20 to 59, which equals this amount. So we have 603,000 approximately versus 601,000. So why is there a difference? When we are looking at numbers 13 through 14, we see that there are 12 spies. They go out to search out the land. They have been at Mount Sinai for 2 years. They're ready to go into the promised land. Joshua and Caleb are part of these 12 spies, and the spies bring back these enormous grapes and all of these wonderful things, but then they're scaredy cats because they're afraid of the giants. And they say there's no way that we can defeat these people. And they actually go to kill Joshua and Caleb. And because the people are resisting going in and taking the land, God tells them, hey, guess what? After the number of days that you searched out the land, the 40 days, that's going to be the number of years that you're going to spend in the wilderness. Now, I will give you credit, 2 years for time served, but you're going to stay here for 40 years. And nobody that was 20 years old and upwards is going to make it to the land of Canaan. You decided that you didn't want to go and you don't think I can do it, so fine. You're not going to get to see it. So when we are looking at this population chart, numbers 1 and 2 is the male population, ages 20 to 59, that we see coming out of Egypt. Numbers 26, this is right before the death of Moses. This is the numbers of people that have survived the 40 years. All of these individuals were under the age of 20 when the spies went through the land. So these are all of the next generation. And we can see where some of these numbers, I mean, look at the tribe of Simeon. They started out with almost 60,000 people, and along the way, they lost 37,000 in population numbers, whereas Manasseh gained, 20,000. So why are we seeing such a difference here in the population numbers of those entering the land of Canaan versus those who exited the land of Egypt? And part of that reason is because of Numbers 25, where right before this census that is taken in Numbers 26, there was a plague that went through and it killed 24,000 people. It was instigated by this individual from the tribe of Simeon. So notice I said that there was this difference of individuals from the tribe of Simeon. And this individual in the tribe of Simeon brought a heathen Baal worshiper into the camp who was one of the princesses of Midian. And because of their actions. It actually led to Phinehas, who's the son of Eleazar, who is now the high priest because Aaron at this point has died. So we are talking like right before Moses' death. He goes in and he stops the plague. But because of this plague, they lost 24,000 people in the camp. So when we are looking at the individuals in this camp, we are seeing where the population has, instead of replenishing itself completely, it's actually decreased. We have nobody over the age of 59 except for two individuals. And points if you can tell me who those two individuals are. But we have somewhere around 1.6 million people that are going into the land of Canaan versus the 3.5 plus million that actually left Egypt. So this means that if we're looking in the correct areas, we should actually be able to locate the graves of somewhere around 3.5 million Israelites as they were wandering the wilderness of Saudi Arabia. So now that we actually have the correct location, if we were able to actually go and excavate and look in Saudi Arabia and for some of these locations that the Bible talks about, we would actually be able to find these graves, these campsites, and actually show that, hey, look, the reason that we couldn't find the evidence in the Sinai Peninsula, it was never there because the Sinai Peninsula is the wrong location. So I hope that clarifies the population chart that was shown last week. I hope that you've learned something new about Mount Sinai, or that this has reaffirmed your faith and belief in the Bible in general. I really would like to thank you for joining us and submitting any questions. If you have any questions for me tonight about this topic, go ahead and drop those in the comment section so that we can get those answered. Do want to remind everybody of our Ask the Archaeologist program that occurs live Friday nights at 8 p.m. We answer the questions that have been sent in through the week, that have come from emails, that we've gotten on some of our live events. Love getting the feedback, getting those questions, and just wanted to thank everybody as we bring season 1 of the ARK-aeology Files to a close. I know that there's a lot of VBS and camp meetings, outreach seminars, and vacations that are coming up. So we are going to take a break on the live The ARK-aeology Files. We're going to resume season 2 this fall. But in the meantime, just remember that we are going to continue as we can with Ask the Archaeologist. And then we're also going to have some special programming announcements coming soon. So watch for those. Thank you for watching. I am not seeing any comments come in over the chat box for this evening. So we will go ahead and close out with a word of prayer. And I just want to wish everybody a safe and happy summer. God's blessings on any of your VBS or camp meeting events or seminars that you have planned. And I look forward to reconnecting with you all in the fall for season 2 of the ARK-aeology Files. And remember, we will continue to have our live Ask the Archaeologist program. So if you could just bow your heads with me for a moment, and we will close with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for being with us and allowing the wonders of everything that you have allowed to be shown to go throughout the world and inspire and be with people to prove that, hey, what you said is true. Lord, we just ask for you to bless all of those that have attended and have programs and events that are coming up, and be with them as they try to spread your word, and just keep us safe and guide us through the next week and the next months as we near your soon return. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to talking with you all soon. Bye.